There is a clipboard on the counter, standard issue metal clip, the kind that bends if you press too hard. The paper underneath is an intake form: name, date of birth, insurance provider, pharmacy, known allergies, current medications. He has filled out forms like this dozens of times. The pen works. The questions are familiar. None of them require thought. They require memory, and his memory is fine. Then the pen reaches a line near the bottom of the page. Emergency contact. 2 words. 1 blank. He does not stop because he is confused. He stops because the line assumes something, not a feeling, a structure. It assumes that somewhere in the architecture of his life there is a person who occupies a specific position. Not a person who knows him, not a person who likes him, a person who can be activated. There are people behind him in the waiting area. The receptionist is handling another call. The television on the wall is showing midday news with the sound off. Nothing in the room has changed. No crisis, no dramatic event. The problem has appeared inside an ordinary administrative line on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He could write a name. Almost anyone could write a name. A brother in another state, a college friend he hasn't spoken to in 4 months, a neighbor who seems reliable. But writing a name is not the same as having a person who stands inside the operational reality of his life. That distinction, which he has never needed to think about clearly until now, sits quietly in the space between the pen and the paper. The recognition is not loneliness. That word does not describe what is happening. Loneliness is an emotional experience. This is a procedural interruption. The form is not asking who he enjoys spending time with. It is not asking who he would call on a Friday evening. It is asking who can be reached, informed, and trusted to act if the next few hours go sideways. Who has enough proximity to arrive? Who has enough knowledge to answer questions? Who has enough standing to make a decision if he temporarily cannot? The pen hovers. Then he writes a name. He is not sure it is the right one. He is not sure the person would know what to do. But the line required something, so he filled it in, the way people do, and moved on. That moment, small, quiet, unremarkable. That is where this begins. Most people fill in that line without thinking. A spouse, an adult child, a sibling who lives nearby. Someone who already exists inside the daily machinery. Someone who knows the medications, the allergies, the insurance details, the house layout, the location of the spare key. Someone who would not need to be briefed. Someone who is already briefed by the ordinary fact of living in shared proximity. The form does not explain itself. It does not define what an emergency contact is expected to do. It does not list the responsibilities, the access requirements, the knowledge base, or the weight of the role. It simply assumes the answer exists. And for most people, it does. The culture has organized itself around a particular assumption. By a certain age, someone stands near the perimeter. Someone is authorized to receive the call. Someone can arrive. Someone can decide if timing collapses. This assumption is so deeply embedded that the form does not even feel like a question for most adults. It feels like a blank to be completed, like the date, like the zip code. Automatic. But for a man who is never married, who is over 55, who has built a self-sustaining life on his own terms, the line is not automatic. It is not that he has no people. It is that no one may occupy the specific structural position the form is quietly asking about. He may be respected at work. He may be liked in his neighborhood. He may have friends who would genuinely care if something happened. He may have a sister who calls every few weeks, or a cousin who checks in around holidays. He may have professional contacts, old roommates, people from a decade ago who still remember his birthday. None of that automatically produces a name that belongs in that box, because the box is not asking about affection. It is not measuring social connection. It is asking about operational standing. Who has the knowledge, the access, the proximity, and the recognized authority to step into his life when his own hands are briefly off the controls? That is a different question entirely. And for a significant number of men in this country, it is a question that has never been answered clearly. Not because they failed at something, but because the life they built never required the answer. Until now. Until this point in the story, independence has looked like evidence of strength, and in most measurable ways it has been. Bills handled on time, home maintained, no domestic chaos, no dependency on another adult for daily function, no visible instability, no pattern of crisis. The lights work, the car is registered, the taxes are filed, the health insurance is current, the refrigerator has food, the lawn gets mowed. For decades, this has been the visible surface, and it has been accurate. Not a performance, not a disguise, an actual, functioning, competent life managed by one person who knows how to manage it. But the emergency contact form introduces a reversal. Small, quiet, bureaucratic, almost invisible in the moment. The reversal is this. What looks like autonomy in ordinary time begins to look like exposure in interrupted time. Ordinary time is when everything works as expected. The body cooperates, the schedule holds, the responsibilities stay within reach. The systems respond to the single operator who built them and runs them. Ordinary time rewards independence. It rewards efficiency. It rewards the absence of unnecessary complication. Interrupted time is different. Interrupted time is when the operator is temporarily unavailable, not dead, not incapacitated permanently, just briefly removed from the controls. A fall that requires an ER visit, a procedure that involves sedation, a recovery that limits mobility for 10 days, a medication reaction that clouds judgment for 72 hours, an overnight hospital stay that was not planned. In interrupted time, the qualities that made the life work so well do not transfer. Independence does not answer the hospital's questions. Competence does not pick up the phone at 2 in the morning. Privacy does not establish authority to make decisions. Order does not create succession. The reversal does not arrive with a crash. It arrives with a form, a clipboard, a line near the bottom. And the man holding the pen may realize, perhaps for the first time with this precision, that the life he has maintained so carefully has no clear handoff point. Not because he forgot to build one, but because the life was never designed to need one. The design is now meeting a question it was not built to answer. The problem is not who cares. People care. People would feel something if they got a phone call. The problem is who is structurally positioned to act. Who can cross the distance between hearing about an event and doing something useful within the time frame the event demands? Who has the information? Who has the access? Who has the standing? Who has the willingness combined with the practical knowledge to operate inside his life for a period of hours or days while he cannot? That is the question the form introduces, and it is the question that will govern everything that follows. He can write a name. He did write a name. He handed the clipboard back and sat down and waited for his appointment like everyone else in the room. Nothing visible changed. No alarm sounded. No social worker appeared. The moment passed the way most moments pass. Quietly, without consequence, without acknowledgement. But the open loop has been introduced, and once introduced, it does not close on its own. The loop is this. When interruption arrives, who is inside the system strongly enough to matter. Not who knows him in passing, not who would attend a memorial, not who would say something generous about him to a mutual acquaintance. Who stands inside his life with enough proximity, legitimacy, and continuity to cross from notification into consequence. Notification is easy. Notification is a phone call. Someone answers, someone hears the information, someone says they are sorry to hear that. Notification requires almost nothing. Consequence is different. Consequence means the person who was notified now has to do something, go somewhere, talk to a doctor, retrieve a set of keys, feed an animal, cancel an appointment, locate a document, make a judgment about what comes next. Stay involved past the first conversation. The distance between notification and consequence is enormous. And for many men over 55 who have never married, that distance has never been tested. Not because they avoided it deliberately, but because ordinary life does not test it. Ordinary life lets the gap exist without penalty. The penalty only arrives when ordinary life is interrupted. These are not therapeutic questions. They are structural ones, and they deserve structural examination. A life can function smoothly in public view and still contain no clear handoff point when interruption enters the room. That is not a flaw of character. It is a feature of design. And like all design features, it carries consequences that only become visible under specific conditions. The conditions are approaching. Not because something terrible is guaranteed to happen, but because after 55, the probability of interruption increases steadily, and the form on the clipboard is the first institutional acknowledgement that the system is about to be tested. The life of a man who has reached 55 without marrying is, in most cases, not a life that went wrong. It is a life that went a particular direction, sometimes by clear decision, sometimes by accumulated circumstance, sometimes by a long series of small choices that each made sense individually and produced a specific architecture collectively. He may have prioritized career mobility. He may have valued solitude more than most people around him understood. He may have ended relationships that felt constraining. He may have watched marriages around him deteriorate and drawn conclusions. He may have simply never met the person who made partnership feel like an improvement over independence. He may have had reasons that are private and entirely rational. None of that needs to be questioned. None of it needs to be corrected. What needs to be examined is the structure that resulted. A man who has managed his own life for 30 years without a co-resident partner has likely developed an operating system that is precise, efficient, and deeply personalized. He knows where everything is. He knows how everything works. He knows the timing of every obligation, the rhythm of every maintenance cycle, the sequence of every recurring task. This is genuine competence. It is real. It is earned. And it is worth acknowledging clearly before anything else is said. But competence that lives in one mind, one body, one set of hands, and one daily presence has a structural characteristic that does not announce itself during stable operation. It is non-transferable. Not because it could not theoretically be transferred, but because no transfer has been arranged, practiced, or even imagined as necessary. The bills are paid, but only he knows the accounts, the passwords, the cycles, and the amounts. The house is maintained, but only he knows the contractor, the warranty status, the irrigation schedule, and the location of the shutoff valve. The medical information is current, but only he carries the medication list, the allergy history, the physician names, and the insurance details in accessible form. Everything works, and everything depends on one person being present, alert, and functional. Consider what this actually consists of after 3 decades of refinement. He knows which day the trash goes out. He knows which pharmacy fills fastest. He knows the sound his furnace makes when the filter needs replacing. He knows the sequence of his bills, not just the amounts, but the timing, the auto-pay schedules, the ones that still require manual attention. He knows the login credentials for 30 or 40 accounts, some stored in memory, some written on a card in a drawer, some saved in a device that only he unlocks. He knows the name of the plumber who actually shows up. He knows which grocery store carries the brand he prefers. He knows where the title to his car is. He knows the expiration date on his passport. He knows the dosage of the prescription he takes every morning and the one he takes 3 times a week. None of this is dramatic. All of it is real. And all of it lives, in operational terms, inside one person. The word for this, in structural terms, is consolidation. And consolidation is efficient. It eliminates communication overhead. It removes negotiation. It avoids the friction that comes from shared systems, shared preferences, shared timelines. A consolidated life moves fast. It adapts quickly. It requires no consensus. But consolidation has a cost that does not appear during normal operation. Nothing in the system is redundant. There is no backup operator, no secondary memory, no parallel knowledge base. In engineering, this is called a single point of failure. Not because the point is weak, often it is the strongest component in the system. The failure risk exists precisely because the system routes everything through one node. If that node is disrupted, even briefly, the entire system experiences degradation. Not collapse, necessarily. Degradation. Slowdown. Gaps. A man does not have to be an engineer to understand this. He just has to imagine what would happen to his household, his finances, his medical situation, and his daily obligations if he were unreachable for 72 hours. Not dead, not permanently incapacitated, just unreachable. Unable to answer questions, unable to give instructions, unable to log in, call back, confirm, approve, cancel, reschedule, or explain. 72 hours. 3 days. That is not a catastrophe. That is a kidney stone that requires hospitalization, a reaction to anesthesia after a routine procedure, a broken bone that requires surgery and an overnight stay that extends into a second and third night, a cardiac event that turns out to be manageable but requires observation. These are not rare events for men over 55. They are ordinary. They happen to disciplined men. They happen to healthy men. They happen to men who take care of themselves. Biology does not grade on effort. And when they happen, the infrastructure that has been running so smoothly on a single operator meets the institutional systems that assume a second one exists. A man can become deeply loyal to the version of himself that got him this far. Self-contained, low maintenance, difficult to corner, competent without witness. There is a particular kind of pride that lives in this. Not loud pride, not boastful pride. The quiet pride of a man who knows that his life runs because he runs it, and that no one else has had to carry the weight of his daily existence. That loyalty is understandable. In many ways, it is admirable. It reflects discipline, accountability, and a refusal to externalize personal responsibility. These are not small qualities. They are real, and they have served him well. But loyalty to a self-image can also create resistance to structural change. Not emotional resistance, structural resistance. The kind where a man intellectually understands that something may need to shift, but the shift feels like it threatens the identity that has kept him stable. If his self-concept is built on not burdening others, then identifying a reliable emergency contact feels like creating a burden. If his dignity is rooted in not requiring supervision, then sharing access to personal systems feels like admitting a need for supervision. If his strength is defined by handling everything alone, then building redundancy into his life can feel like acknowledging that he cannot handle everything. These are not irrational reactions. They are predictable consequences of an identity that was shaped by decades of solo operation. The identity was not wrong. It was adaptive. It worked. But the environment is beginning to change, not because he changed, because age changes the operating conditions. And identity structures that formed under one set of conditions do not always serve equally well under a different set. This is not a failure of the man. It is a misalignment between a well-built identity and an evolving context. And understanding that misalignment clearly, without shame, without urgency, without sentimental framing, is the first step towards seeing the real architecture of the problem. Over time, a private life can become precise, efficient, and nearly unobserved. The home works. The calendar works. The money works. The repairs get done. The body is managed adequately. Nothing appears broken from the outside because nothing is broken from the outside. Then one institutional question on a medical intake form exposes something that has been present for a long time but never required attention. Not whether he is alone. That is not the right framing. The question is whether his life is legible to anyone else. Whether someone, anyone, could step into his world for a week and understand how it operates. Where things are. What matters. What is time-sensitive? What can wait? Who to call? What not to touch? Legibility. That is the word. Not loneliness, not isolation, not failure. Can the life be read by another person if the author is temporarily unable to narrate it? For most men in this position, the honest answer is no. Not because they are secretive, not because they are hostile to connection, but because legibility was never a design requirement. The life was built for one operator, and one operator has always been enough. The form on the clipboard is the first signal that one operator may not always be enough, not because he is declining, not because something is wrong today, but because the probability curve has shifted, and the architecture has not shifted with it. The spare key tells the whole story. Either someone has one, or they don't. To see what happens when a solo-managed system meets institutional reality, it helps to look at specific sequences. Not worst case, ordinary case. The kind that happens to thousands of men every week in this country. A fall in the bathroom at 6 in the morning. He hits the edge of the tub on the way down. His shoulder takes most of the impact, but his head strikes the tile. He is conscious. He is in pain. He can move, but his left arm is not responding the way it should, and there is blood on the floor from a cut above his ear. He manages to get to his phone. He calls 911. The paramedics arrive. They stabilize him. They transport him. By 8:30, he is in an emergency department bed with a laceration being cleaned and his shoulder being evaluated for a possible fracture. He is alert. He is cooperative. He answers questions accurately. He provides his name, his date of birth, his medications, his insurance information. He is not confused. He is not impaired. He is a competent adult who fell in his bathroom and needs medical attention. But the system around him has already started generating questions that reach beyond his immediate medical care. The nurse asks for an emergency contact. He gives the same name he wrote on the form. The nurse asks for the relationship. He says, friend. The nurse writes it down. There is a pause. Not a long one, but a pause. The system is calibrated for spouse, parent, child, sibling. Friend is accepted, but it does not carry the same institutional weight. This is not sentiment. This is law. Under HIPAA, the hospital has limited ability to share medical information with someone who has no legal standing. A spouse has presumptive authority in most states. An adult child has recognized standing. A friend who shows up and says, "I am his friend," encounters a system that is polite but guarded. Not because the system is cruel, because the system has rules. and the rules were written for a different domestic architecture. Without a healthcare proxy or medical power of attorney on file, the friend cannot authorize a procedure, cannot access detailed medical information, cannot make decisions during a period of incapacity. The friend has goodwill. The institution requires documentation. The doctor explains that his shoulder is fractured, not severely, but it will require immobilization. He will need a sling. He will need to follow up with an orthopedist within 5 days. He will need someone to drive him home because he should not be operating a vehicle with one arm immobilized and a mild concussion protocol in place. He nods. He understands. He asks when he can leave. The discharge nurse begins a different set of questions. Is there someone who can pick him up? Is there someone who will be at his home when he arrives? Is there someone who can help him manage daily tasks with one arm for the first several days? Does he have stairs? Does he have grab bars? Does he live alone? He answers each question. Yes, he can call someone for a ride. No, there will not be someone at his home. Yes, he lives alone. No, he does not have grab bars in the bathroom. Yes, he has stairs. The discharge nurse makes a note. The note does not trigger an alarm. It does not summon a social worker automatically, but it enters the record, and it subtly adjusts the institutional posture around his case. Because the hospital now understands that this patient is being discharged into a home with no secondary support, and that understanding changes the way the next steps are handled. The discharge instructions are more detailed than they might otherwise be. The follow-up timeline is tighter. The warnings about signs of concussion are emphasized more heavily. A home health referral is mentioned almost as an afterthought, but it is mentioned. Underneath all of it is an institutional awareness that this man is going home to a system with one operator, and that operator is currently impaired. He calls the friend whose name he wrote on the form. The friend answers. The friend is surprised. The friend says, of course, he will come. He arrives an hour later. He drives the man home. He helps him inside. He asks if there is anything else he can do. The man says no, he is fine. The friend leaves. And now the man is standing in his kitchen with one functional arm, a headache, discharge papers on the counter, a prescription he needs filled, an orthopedist he needs to schedule, a bathroom with blood on the floor that he cannot easily clean, and a dog that has been alone since 6 in the morning and needs to go outside. The friend who drove him home does not know about the dog's medication schedule, does not know which pharmacy he uses, does not know that the orthopedist his regular doctor recommends is in a building that requires parallel parking, which he cannot do with one arm, does not know that his bedroom is upstairs and that sleeping on the couch will aggravate his shoulder, does not know where the extra sheets are, does not know that the water heater has been making a noise and probably should not be left unattended for a week without checking the pressure valve. The friend did a kind thing, a genuinely kind thing. He answered the phone. He drove across town. He helped, but he did not have operational standing. He had goodwill. Goodwill and operational standing are not the same thing. Goodwill is a single act of generosity. Operational standing is sustained, informed involvement in the mechanics of a life. The man is now alone with a fractured shoulder, a concussion protocol, and a set of systems that assume their operator is fully functional. He will manage. He always manages. But the cost of managing under these conditions is higher than it would be if the infrastructure included a second person with real working knowledge of his daily life. That cost is not visible to anyone. It is absorbed internally, the way it always has been. The chain does not stop at the hospital. That is what makes this structural rather than situational. His mail accumulates. Not junk mail, real mail. Bills with deadlines, insurance correspondence, a notice from the county about a property assessment, a credit card statement that, if missed, triggers a late fee, and a credit flag that takes months to reverse. His home sits unattended. Not abandoned, unattended. The drip under the kitchen sink that he was going to deal with this weekend is now dripping into day 3. The food in the refrigerator is approaching its limit. The garbage was supposed to go out Wednesday. If he has a pet, the chain accelerates. The dog needs to be fed, walked, and let outside within hours, not days. Someone needs to enter the home. Someone needs to know where the food is stored. Someone needs to have a key or know where one is hidden. Someone needs to be trusted inside his private space. His phone may be at the hospital with him, but his phone is also the access point for most of his digital life. Banking apps, email, two-factor authentication codes. If he is sedated, recovering, or simply too tired to manage a screen for a few days, the phone sits in a drawer by the hospital bed doing nothing. And the systems connected to that phone continue running on their own schedules, indifferent to his condition. None of this is catastrophic on day 1. It becomes cumulative. And cumulative friction on a man who is recovering from a medical event is not just administrative. It is physiological. Stress during recovery slows healing. Worry about unattended obligations raises cortisol. Decision fatigue during reduced cognitive sharpness leads to errors that create new problems. This is not catastrophe. This is cascade. Small failures of timing and capacity layering on top of each other, producing cumulative stress during a period when stress directly impedes recovery. The orthopedist visit requires transportation. If the man cannot drive, he needs a ride. He can call a rideshare service. He can call the friend again. Each option works in isolation, but each option also requires coordination, timing, communication, and a willingness to ask. The willingness to ask is not trivial. For a man whose identity has been built on self-sufficiency, each request for help carries a small cost. Not financial cost, identity cost. Each phone call that begins with the words, "I need a favor," is a minor contradiction of the narrative he has lived by. He is not being dramatic about this. He is not having a breakdown over a phone call. But the friction is real. And over the course of a recovery that stretches into weeks, the friction accumulates. Some men solve this by not asking. They drive themselves before they should. They return to physical activity before the doctor clears them. They skip follow-up appointments because getting there requires too much coordination. They tell themselves the shoulder feels fine when it does not. They tell the doctor they have support at home when they do not. This is not deception in any malicious sense. It is identity preservation under structural pressure. The man is maintaining the version of himself that has always worked, the capable version. The version that does not need to explain his living situation to a discharge nurse or justify his choices to a concerned friend. But identity preservation during recovery can become medically counterproductive. A shoulder that is not properly rehabilitated loses range of motion permanently. A concussion that is not monitored can mask a slow bleed. A man who skips follow-up because he cannot coordinate transportation may miss the window for effective intervention. The medical consequences of thin relational infrastructure are not theoretical. They are documented. Unmarried men over 50 have higher rates of delayed treatment, incomplete recovery, and hospital readmission than their married counterparts. Not because they are less healthy at baseline, but because the recovery environment is less supported. The system around them is thinner. The net is narrower. The margin for error is smaller. This does not mean marriage is a medical prescription. That framing would be insulting and inaccurate. What it means is that the structural characteristics of a solo-managed life create specific vulnerabilities during medical recovery, and those vulnerabilities are not addressed by competence, discipline, or willpower. They are addressed by human infrastructure. by someone who is present, informed, and involved. The financial dimension runs parallel to the medical one, but on a different timeline. A bill that is normally paid on the 3rd of the month is not paid because the man is in the hospital on the 3rd and does not think about it until the 9th. The late fee is $15. $15 is not a crisis, but the late payment may trigger a flag on a credit report. That flag may take 60 to 90 days to resolve. Resolving it requires a phone call, documentation, and patience, all in shorter supply during recovery. An insurance claim requires a follow-up call. The call has a 40-minute hold time. The man is exhausted. He hangs up. The claim sits in pending status. A second notice arrives, then a third. By the time he addresses it, the situation is escalated from routine to disputed. His car insurance renewal notice arrived while he was in the hospital. It sat in the pile of mail. The renewal window closes in 4 days. If it lapses, reinstatement requires a new application and a gap in coverage that his state's DMV will flag. None of these are devastating individually. All of them require an alert, functional adult to notice and respond in a timely way. When that adult is also recovering from a fracture and a concussion, the response time stretches. And stretched response time is where friction becomes cost. A man who has built a well-organized financial life can see that organization degrade surprisingly fast under the pressure of a medical event. Not because the organization was flawed, because the organization depended on continuous monitoring by one person, and that person was temporarily unable to monitor. In a partnered household, the second operator absorbs the overflow automatically, checks the mail, walks the dog, adjusts the thermostat, calls the pharmacy, monitors the bank account, does all of this while the primary operator recovers. When there is no second operator, the overflow has nowhere to go. It sits, it accumulates. It waits for the man to recover enough to deal with it himself, which he will, because he always does. But the cost of dealing with it during recovery is higher than the cost of dealing with it under normal conditions. And that cost compounds. But the fall is only one scenario. Consider a second. Quieter. No ambulance, no emergency room. He wakes up at 3 in the morning on a Saturday with pressure in his chest. Not sharp pain, pressure. The kind that could be indigestion, could be anxiety, could be something else. He lies in the dark and runs the calculation. If he calls 911, the paramedics arrive. The neighbors see the ambulance. The hospital runs tests. They might be nothing. There might be a false alarm that costs him a night of sleep and $1,000 in ER fees. If he waits until morning, the pressure might be gone. He might feel foolish for worrying. In a shared household, this calculation includes another person, a wife who wakes up and says, "That doesn't sound right. We should go." A partner who calls the doctor's after-hours line while he sits on the edge of the bed arguing that it is probably nothing. The second person breaks the inertia, overrides the self-assessment, introduces a bias toward caution that a solo operator, trained to solve his own problems, does not naturally carry. Alone at 3 in the morning, the calculation is entirely internal. There is no one to override, no one to insist, no one to notice the next morning that his color is off, that he is shorter of breath than usual, that he is rubbing his left arm without realizing it. He decides to wait. The pressure fades by morning. He goes about his day. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a warning. The point is not the medical outcome. The point is the decision structure. A man alone at 3 in the morning making a medical judgment about his own body has no second opinion, no external check, no one whose concern might push the decision in a safer direction. This is not about having someone hold his hand. It is about having someone whose perspective disrupts the self-contained loop of a man who has spent decades trusting his own judgment above all others. That judgment has been excellent. It has kept him alive and functional for a long time, but it is operating without a check valve. And in cardiac situations, the absence of a check valve is not a philosophical concern. It is a clinical one. Men who live alone are significantly more likely to delay seeking treatment for cardiac symptoms, not because they are ignorant, because the decision architecture does not include a second voice. He goes to work on Monday. He does not mention the Saturday night pressure to anyone, not his coworker, not his barber, not the friend who drove him home from the hospital 6 months ago. It becomes a data point that lives only inside him, unrecorded, unshared, untracked. If it happens again, the calculation will be the same, internal, solitary, conducted in the dark with no external input. And if the calculation is wrong, if the pressure is not indigestion but an early sign of something that requires intervention, the delay will have been produced not by ignorance, but by architecture, by the design of a life in which no one is close enough to ask, "How did you sleep last night? You look a little off." That question, that simple, unremarkable, daily proximity question, it is the check valve, and it does not exist in a solo-managed life. Not because the man eliminated it deliberately, because it was never installed. Consider a third scenario. No medical event at all. A neighbor on his street notices that his trash cans have not been brought in for 2 weeks. The cans are sitting at the curb, empty after collection, but never wheeled back. The newspaper, he still gets a physical paper, is piling up on the front step. The neighbor thinks about it again, walks past the house one more time. Then what? The neighbor does not have his phone number, does not know the name of anyone connected to him, does not have a key, does not know if he has family, does not know if he is on vacation, in the hospital, or lying on the floor inside. The neighbor knocks. No answer. Knocks louder. After a few minutes, the door opens. He is there. He has been sick, a bad flu that turned into bronchitis. He has been managing it alone, as he manages everything, with over-the-counter medication and patience. He lost track of the trash cans. He has not checked the mail. "He is fine," he says. "He is fine." The neighbor nods and walks away. But that moment, the neighbor standing on the porch with no one to call and no way to verify what is happening inside, contains the entire structural exposure. Not a crisis, an absence of pathways. No one in the surrounding environment had a route into his life. Not a phone number, not a protocol, not a relationship with enough standing to check. His life was invisible to every system around it. Not hostile, not hidden deliberately, just unconnected. 3 scenarios: a fall, a late-night symptom, an absent trash can. None of them catastrophic, all of them revealing the same structural characteristic from different angles. The fall revealed institutional friction, the gap between a life designed for one and a medical system designed for 2. The late-night symptom revealed decision isolation, the absence of a check valve in moments of medical ambiguity. The trash can revealed environmental opacity, the inability of surrounding systems to detect, verify, or respond to a disruption inside a private life. Each scenario, taken alone, is manageable. Taken together, they describe an architecture, and the architecture has a single defining feature. It has no secondary pathway, no redundancy, no way for information, access, or action to flow through anyone other than the primary operator. That is not a moral failing. It is a design characteristic. And like all design characteristics, it performs differently under different conditions. The social world around a man in this position often carries a specific misperception. It confuses the absence of complaint with the absence of need. It confuses composure with completeness. Many never-married men over 55 have built their dignity through a particular form of containment. They do not leak. They do not impose. They do not make early requests for help. They do not organize their lives around the possibility of rescue. They handle things independently, consistently, without broadcasting the effort involved. This creates genuine social respect. People around him may see a man who has his act together, who does not complain, who does not burden others with his logistics, who seems to need less than most, who moves through the world with a kind of clean efficiency that many people admire, even envy. But what creates social respect in ordinary time can create silent exclusion in interrupted time. If a man never asks for help, people assume he does not need it. If he never shares the details of his health, his finances, or his daily operations, people have no framework for offering assistance. If he never positions anyone as an insider, no one knows how to step inside when stepping inside becomes necessary. The exclusion is not malicious, it is reciprocal. He does not ask, they do not offer. He does not share, they do not know. He does not include, they do not presume. Both sides are behaving reasonably within the terms of the relationship as it has been defined over years. But when the interruption comes, those terms are suddenly insufficient, and the insufficiency cannot be corrected in the moment. You cannot build operational standing during a crisis. You can only discover whether it already exists. For many men in this position, the discovery is that it does not. There is a distinction that matters here, and it is one that most social frameworks fail to make clearly. The distinction is between social connection and operational standing. Social connection is broad. It includes anyone a man knows, talks to, enjoys, respects, or maintains contact with. The neighbor who waves from the driveway, the colleague who remembers his coffee order, the old friend who texts on birthdays, the cousin who shares family news, the bartender who asks how his week went. These are real connections. They are not insignificant. They contribute to belonging, recognition, and continuity in daily life. A man with many such connections is not isolated in any meaningful social sense. But operational standing is narrower, much narrower. Operational standing means someone who occupies a position of functional relevance inside the man's actual life infrastructure, not symbolic relevance, functional relevance. Functional relevance requires several things simultaneously. Proximity, not necessarily living next door, but close enough to respond within hours when something time-sensitive occurs. Knowledge, enough about the man's daily systems, health situation, and personal preferences to act without extensive briefing. Legitimacy, being recognized by institutions as someone who has the right to act on his behalf. And continuity, the willingness and capacity to remain involved across the full arc of an event. A man may have 30 social connections and 0 people with operational standing. That is not unusual. It is common. Because operational standing is not granted by affection. It is built by sustained proximity, shared information, mutual expectation, and structural access. Consider what legitimacy means in practical terms. A hospital will share information with a spouse without hesitation. An adult child receives automatic deference. A sibling with the same last name gets institutional benefit of the doubt. A friend who shows up and says, "I am his friend," encounters a system that is polite but guarded. Not because the system is cruel, because the system has rules, and the rules prioritize legally and domestically recognized relationships. A man who is never married and has no children may discover that his closest human connections carry less institutional weight than a distant relative he has not spoken to in years. That is not a reflection of emotional reality. It is a reflection of legal and administrative structure. And within that structure, The friend who cares deeply and the estranged cousin who does not are not positioned equally. Consider what continuity means in practical terms. The first phone call is easy. People answer. People express concern. People offer to help. But the first phone call is not where the real demand appears. The real demand appears on day 3, day 7, day 14, when the initial concern is faded and the ongoing need remains. Continuity is rare. It is rare even in families. It is rarer still among friends. And for a man whose social connections are real but structurally shallow, the expectation of sustained involvement may be unrealistic. Not because his friends are bad people, but because sustained involvement requires a level of integration that friendship alone does not typically produce. The people in his life are positioned at a distance that reflects the terms of the relationship as it has existed for years. Those terms were adequate for ordinary life. They are not automatically adequate for interrupted life. For a man who has spent decades building a perimeter specifically designed to function without interior participants, this is a structural contradiction. The life works because no one else is needed inside it. But the crisis requires someone inside it, and there has been no mechanism for admitting them. Not out of hostility, out of unnecessary effort during stable times. The real emergency is often not the event itself. The fall is not the emergency. The fracture is not the emergency. The hospital stay is not the emergency. Those events are managed by professionals within systems designed to handle them. The emergency is the absence of a person already positioned to carry continuity through the event. The absence of someone who can bridge the gap between the institution and the home, between the medical system and the daily life, between the moment of disruption and the return to normal operation. That absence is the structural emergency. And it is one that no ambulance responds to, no insurance covers, no discharge plan addresses, because the system assumes it does not exist. The system assumes someone is there. When someone is not there, the man compensates. He always compensates. He's good at it. He has been compensating his entire adult life, though he would not describe it that way. He would describe it as living, as managing, as handling things. But after 55, the cost of compensation increases. The body recovers more slowly. The energy depletes more quickly. The cognitive reserve is thinner. The tolerance for administrative friction is lower. And the gap between what the life demands and what one impaired person can deliver grows wider with each passing year. The architecture was built for a younger, healthier, fully operational version of himself, a version that could absorb the overflow without visible strain. That version is not gone, but it is aging, and the architecture has not been updated to reflect the change. There is a word from the financial world that applies here, though the man would probably not use it about himself. The word is illiquidity. Privacy can behave like a hidden form of structural illiquidity. He may possess assets, discipline, order, and competence, but if none of it can move through another trusted person when needed, the life is less flexible than it appears, less responsive, less capable of adapting to interruption. Liquidity means assets that can be converted to useful action quickly. Illiquidity means assets that exist but cannot be accessed when needed. A man's life can be rich in every practical sense and still be illiquid in the structural sense. Everything is there, but nothing can be activated by anyone other than him. Everything is there. Nothing is transferable. That is the paradox of the well-managed solo life after 55. So now the question turns. It stops describing what is missing and begins asking what happens inside the man when he sees the gap clearly. He is sitting in his living room on a Tuesday evening. The shoulder has healed. The concussion cleared weeks ago. The bathroom floor has been cleaned. The bills have been caught up, the dog is fed, the mail is sorted. Everything is returned to normal. But something is not returned to where it was before. He is not shaken. He is not depressed. He is not spiraling into some dark reassessment of his life. Nothing that dramatic. What has happened is smaller and more persistent. An awareness has settled in. Not an emotion, a recognition. The kind that does not arrive with force but also does not leave when the immediate cause is resolved. He handled it. He handled all of it. The fall, the hospital, the recovery, the logistics, the paperwork, the cascade of small administrative problems that piled up while he was impaired. He got through it the way he has gotten through everything. Alone, competently, without asking for more than he absolutely needed. And now, sitting in the room where he has sat 10,000 times before, he is aware of something he was not aware of before the fall. Not aware emotionally, aware structurally. The life works. It has always worked. But it works because he works. And he is not going to work forever. Not at this capacity, not with this reliability, not with this margin. That is the destabilization. Not a crisis, a shift in the floor. The kind where the room looks the same but something underneath has moved and he can feel it even though nothing visible has changed. He pours a glass of water with his good hand, stands at the kitchen window, looks at the yard he has maintained for 14 years. The fence he repaired himself last spring. The gutter he cleaned in October. The tree he planted when he moved in, now tall enough to shade the driveway. All of it his. All of it held together by his attention, his labor, his presence. And for the first time, the word that comes to mind is not pride. It is not satisfaction. It is a word he has not applied to his own life before. Fragile. Not the house, not the finances, not the health. The system. The arrangement by which all of these things are connected to one person, and only one person. The arrangement that has felt like strength for 30 years and now, standing at the window with one arm in a sling, feels like something else. He does not say the word out loud. He would not say it to anyone. But he thinks it. And once thought, it does not go away. The destabilization does not come from imagining the worst. It comes from imagining the ordinary. Not a stroke, not a cancer diagnosis, not a car accident that leaves him permanently disabled. Those are the scenarios the mind jumps to when it wants to dramatize the situation and then dismiss it. If he only imagines the catastrophic, he can tell himself the odds are low and move on. And he would be right. The odds of any single catastrophic event are low. But the destabilization is not about catastrophe. It is about frequency. The ordinary medical events that become increasingly common after 55 and that do not require tragedy to produce disruption. A procedure with sedation. He will need someone to drive him home. He will need someone to be present for the first few hours. He will need someone the surgical center can call if something goes sideways during recovery. These are requirements, not suggestions. The surgical center will not release him to a rideshare driver. They will not release him to an empty house without confirmation that someone will be there. A colonoscopy. Routine. Recommended. The medical part takes 45 minutes. The coordination takes days. He will need to ask someone. He will need to arrange timing. He will need to trust that the person will show up. He sits in the recovery room afterward, groggy from the sedation. The nurse checks his vitals, looks at the chart, says, "Your ride is in the waiting area?" "A friend," he says. The nurse nods. There is a slight adjustment in her tone. Not pity, not judgment, a professional recalibration, a note being made internally about the kind of discharge this will be. That adjustment. The microsecond change in a healthcare worker's voice when the word friend replaces wife or son. It is not malicious. It is institutional muscle memory. The man hears it every time. He has learned to absorb it without reaction, the way he absorbs everything, quietly, without visible strain. The self-image says one thing, the situation says another. The self-image says he has handled everything, and it is correct. He has. For decades, he has managed every dimension of his life without sustained assistance from another person. That is not a story he tells himself. It is an observable fact. The evidence is everywhere. The house, the career, the finances, the health, the daily operation of a complex adult life maintained at a high standard by one person. The destabilizing counterpoint is this: that may be the reason no one else can. Not because others are incapable, but because no one has been trained. No one has been briefed. No one has been included in the operating system at a level that would allow them to function within it independently. The very success of the solo operation has ensured that no secondary operator exists. This is not an accusation. It must not be heard as one. It is a structural observation. He already knows it. He knew it when the pen hovered over the emergency contact line. He knew it when the discharge nurse asked if someone would be at his home. He knew it standing in his kitchen with one arm in a sling and blood on the bathroom floor and a dog that needed walking. He has known it for longer than he would admit, probably. Not as a fully formed thought, as a peripheral awareness, the kind that lives at the edge of daily consciousness and occasionally surfaces during a quiet moment, late at night, early in the morning, in the pause between one task and the next, when the mind is not occupied and the recognition drifts in without invitation. The recognition is not that he is alone. He knows he is alone. He has been alone for a long time, and for most of that time, being alone has been functional, preferred, and entirely adequate. The recognition is that alone has a different meaning after 55 than it did at 35. Not emotionally, structurally. At 35, alone meant efficient, independent, unburdened. At 55, alone still means those things, but it also means something it did not mean before. Unwitnessed, unbacked, unsucceedable. Those are not emotional words, they are operational words. No one is watching the system closely enough to notice early signs of trouble. No one is positioned to step in if the operator needs relief. No one has been designated, prepared, or authorized to continue the essential functions if continuity is interrupted. The self-image resists this recognition, not violently, quietly. The way a well-built structure resists pressure, it holds, it absorbs. It does not crack, but it registers the load. For many men who have reached this point in life without marrying, independence is not merely a practical arrangement, it is a moral architecture. Independence means he does not burden others. That is a value, a real one. He watched people around him create burdens, spouses who leaned too hard, friends who could not manage their own affairs, relatives who expected rescue. He decided, consciously or not, that he would not be that. Independence means he does not require supervision. He has seen what supervision looks like in relationships, the checking in, the reporting, the negotiation of every decision. He opted out, not from intimacy necessarily, from structural dependency. Independence means freedom from humiliation. This one runs deeper and is less often spoken. The humiliation of needing help. The humiliation of admitting a gap. of being seen as less capable, less together, less in command than the surface has always suggested. For a man who has invested decades in a composed exterior, the prospect of that exterior being revealed as structurally incomplete is not trivial. Independence means protection from entanglement, from the complexity that comes with shared lives, from the disappointments, the compromises, the negotiations, the erosions that he has watched other men endure. These are not pathologies. They are choices. They are values. They have served him. They have produced a life that is admirable by nearly any external standard. And to question the structure is to risk, in his perception, questioning the man who built it. This is the fracture point, not emotional, structural. The conditions are not asking him to abandon independence. They are asking whether independence, as currently configured, is transferable, whether it can survive a period when the operator cannot operate, whether it has any secondary pathway at all. The answer, honestly examined, is usually no. Not because the man failed to build one, but because building one would have contradicted the very principles that made the life work. That contradiction sits at the center of the examination like a weight that cannot be redistributed. He cannot simply decide to build a pathway. The decision runs against every instinct that got him here. It requires a kind of internal negotiation that is foreign to a man who has operated for decades without negotiating his life with anyone. And yet, the contradiction does not resolve by ignoring it. It does not become smaller with time. It becomes larger. Not because something is deteriorating, because the conditions are changing around a structure that is not changing with them. The gap between the design and the environment widens by 1 year every year, invisibly, steadily, without announcement. A man who built his house to withstand summer storms may discover, decades later, that the climate has shifted and the real threat is now winter ice. The house is not poorly built. The house is well built for conditions that no longer fully apply. That is the precise nature of the problem, and it deserves to be understood with that precision, not reduced to loneliness or regret or any of the other emotional categories that the culture offers when it encounters a man living alone past 55. The deepest question rises here, without sentimental framing, without therapeutic language. If a life has been lived honorably, carefully, intelligently, and privately, what does it mean if no one is positioned to stand inside it when standing becomes necessary? This is not about romance, not about missed opportunities, not about the relationships that did not happen or the choices that were made differently than someone else might have made them. That framing is reductive, and this man would rightly reject it. This is about human adjacency under conditions of aging, the physical, informational, and structural nearness of another person who exists inside the operating perimeter of the life. A man can live without adjacency for decades and experience no deficit, because adjacency is only tested by interruption. And if interruption never comes, the absence is invisible. But after 55, the probability of interruption rises on a curve that does not flatten. It steepens. A man who avoided every medical event for 25 years may encounter 3 in the next 10. Not because he is declining rapidly, because biology operates on its own schedule. And if a second person does not exist, the man faces a choice the life's design did not prepare him for. He can endure the event alone, absorbing the full cost. He can improvise support from connections not built for this purpose. Or he can begin the slow process of building adjacency into a life that was specifically designed to function without it. Many men choose a fourth option, not to think about it, to set the clipboard down, to drive home, to resume the routine, to trust that the next event is far enough away that the question can be deferred. That deferral is the most common response. It is also the most structurally dangerous, not because the next event is imminent, but because adjacency cannot be built quickly. It requires time, repeated contact, gradual sharing of information, the slow accumulation of trust, familiarity, and operational knowledge that only develops through sustained proximity. A man cannot call someone from a hospital bed and say, "I need you to operate my life for a week," if that person has never been inside the life before. The gap is too wide. The knowledge is too absent. It is like handing the controls of a complex machine to someone who has never seen the dashboard. Adjacency is built in advance, or it is not available during the event. No shortcut, no substitute. There is a particular cruelty in this timing. The moment when adjacency becomes most important is exactly the moment when building it becomes most difficult. When a man is healthy, mobile, and fully operational, he does not feel the need. When he is impaired, the need is obvious, but the capacity to build is gone. This is why the form matters, not as a document, as a signal. It arrives during health. It asks the question before the question becomes urgent. It offers the man a chance to act while he still has full capacity to act. Most men set the form down and move on, because the form arrives during ordinary time. And ordinary time does not feel like the right moment to build something for interrupted time. But ordinary time is the only moment. The window for preparation is always now, and now always feels too early, until suddenly it is too late. The strongest parts of the man may have built the very conditions that now leave his life structurally unaccompanied. That recognition must land with gravity, not sentiment. He did not do anything wrong. He did exactly what the conditions of his life rewarded. He built competence. He built order. He built privacy. He built efficiency. He built an adult life that required no one else to function. Now the conditions have shifted. Not dramatically, not overnight. The way weather changes. Not a storm, a season. The season he is entering rewards different structural qualities than the season he has been in. The previous season rewarded control, self-sufficiency, and efficient solo operation. The approaching season rewards transferability, legibility, and human redundancy. He did not misread the previous season. He read it perfectly. He built for it expertly. The problem is that the structure does not automatically adapt to new conditions. It must be modified, and modification requires acknowledging that the original design, while excellent for its intended purpose, is incomplete for the purpose that is approaching. That acknowledgement is the hardest part, not because it is emotionally devastating, because it is structurally honest. And structural honesty, for a man who has built his life on a particular model, feels like a crack in the foundation. Not a fatal crack, but the first one. The kind that cannot be unseen once noticed. He noticed it at the intake desk. He noticed it again during the discharge. He noticed it standing in his kitchen with one arm in a sling. He notices it now, sitting in his living room, fully recovered, fully functional, fully restored to the life he has always known. The crack is not in his capability. It is in the design. And the design, until now, has been invisible to him because it has never failed. Things that have never failed are experienced as permanent, as fixed, as inherent. It takes a disruption, even a small one, to reveal that they are not permanent. They are conditional, and the conditions are changing. The issue is not whether he can still manage. He can. Today, he can. Tomorrow, he probably can. Next year, he almost certainly can. The issue is whether management alone is a sufficient design for later life. Whether a system built entirely around one person's continuous, uninterrupted competence is adequate for a phase of life in which interruption becomes increasingly probable. That is the decisive mental turn, not from independence to dependence, not from strength to weakness, from management to design, from operating the system to examining whether the system itself is built for what comes next. A life organized entirely around self-command can become most vulnerable precisely when command is briefly removed. He is sitting at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning, coffee in front of him, the newspaper open but unread. He is looking at a blank sheet of paper. No one asked him to do this. No form required it. No doctor suggested it. No friend hinted. He picked up the pen because the question from the waiting room has been sitting in the back of his mind for weeks. Not loudly, not urgently. The way a problem sits when a man recognizes it as real but has not yet decided what to do about it. He starts writing. Dr. Peterson, primary care. The number, the clinic address, the patient portal login, his medication list. Lisinopril, 10 milligrams, once daily. Atorvastatin, 20 milligrams, once daily. Vitamin D, 2000 IU. The pharmacy on Elm Street, they have his insurance on file. He writes the name of his insurance company, the policy number, the member services line, the group number from his employer. He writes where the fireproof box is. Closet in the spare room, top shelf behind the winter coats. The key is in the desk drawer under the stapler. He writes about the dog, Charlie, fed twice a day. The blue bag, not the red bag. The red bag is for treats only, allergic to chicken. The vet's name is Dr. Huang, number on the refrigerator magnet. He writes the code for the garage, the fact that the back door sticks in humidity and needs to be lifted slightly while turning the handle. The sump pump should be checked if it rains more than 2 inches. He writes for about 40 minutes. One page becomes 2. He folds them, puts them in an envelope, seals it. Then he sits there holding the envelope and thinks about who to give it to. That is the moment. Not the writing. The writing was easy. He knows his own life better than anyone. The hard part is the next step. The step where the information leaves his possession and enters someone else's. The question is no longer, why is this uncomfortable? The question is, what kind of life structure would reduce the vacuum without destroying what he has built? That reframing matters because the previous framing was diagnostic. It identified the problem, named the gap. But diagnosis is not design. And this man is not someone who sits with a diagnosis. He builds. He has always been someone who builds. If the structure is insufficient, his instinct is not to grieve the insufficiency. It is to examine what modification is possible. The first thing the design requires is a distinction between autonomy and isolation. These two words are used interchangeably in most conversations about single men over 50. They should not be. They describe fundamentally different conditions. Autonomy is self-governance, the ability to make decisions about one's own life without external permission or interference. A man can be autonomous while surrounded by people. A man can be autonomous while deeply connected. Autonomy is about authority over choices. It does not require solitude. It does not require opacity. Isolation is disconnection from operational support. A man can be isolated while appearing social. A man can be isolated while maintaining friendships, attending events, and engaging in community. Because isolation, in this precise sense, is not about how many people know him. It is about how deeply anyone is embedded in the functional architecture of his life. A man can be autonomous without being isolated. That is the critical insight. The two conditions have been treated as bonded for so long that the distinction has become invisible, but they are separate. Separating them is the first step toward a design that preserves what matters and addresses what is missing. Autonomy is worth preserving. It has served him. It continues to serve him. It is not the problem. The problem is that autonomy has been implemented through isolation, through total informational and operational self-containment, through a life that is ungoverned by others but also unreadable by others. The design question is whether autonomy can be maintained while reducing isolation, whether the life can remain fully his while becoming legible enough to survive an interruption. The answer is yes, but the answer requires work this man has not done before. Not because he could not, because the work was never needed. And beginning work that was never needed for a future condition that has not yet arrived requires a different kind of discipline than the one he has practiced. His existing discipline is reactive. Something needs doing, he does it. A bill arrives, he pays it. A repair is needed, he arranges it. This discipline is excellent. The discipline required now is anticipatory. It asks him to build something before it is needed, to create a structure with no immediate purpose, to invest time and attention in an arrangement that will only prove its value under conditions that may not arrive for years. This is harder, not intellectually, motivationally. The clipboard is behind him. The shoulder has healed. The routine has resumed. Without urgency, the motivation to build something new is thin. There is a specific psychology to this resistance, and it is worth examining precisely because the man himself would not call it resistance. He would call it prioritization. He has 100 things that need his attention today. The fence needs staining. The quarterly tax estimate is due. The car needs an oil change. The dog is overdue for a vet check. Each of these has a clear deadline, a concrete outcome, and a visible consequence for delay. Building a continuity pathway has none of those qualities. There is no deadline. There is no visible consequence today, tomorrow, or next month. There is no institutional reminder, no late fee, no notification. The task sits in the category of important but not urgent. And for a man whose entire operating system is calibrated to respond to the urgent and concrete, important but not urgent tasks can drift for years. He is not procrastinating. Procrastination implies he is committed to the task and is avoiding it. He has not committed. He is still deciding whether the task is necessary. And every day that passes without an interruption provides fresh evidence that it is not. The system continues working. The body continues functioning. The life continues running smoothly. Each good day is a quiet argument against preparation. This is the trap of probability. Low probability events feel optional to prepare for until they arrive, at which point preparation is no longer possible. The man who never bought flood insurance because it never flooded is not irrational. He is unlucky in a specific way. He confused a long streak of normal conditions for a permanent state. But the arithmetic has not changed. The probability curve has not flattened. The body has not gotten younger. The form will appear again at the next appointment and the one after that. And each time, the answer will either be more prepared or less. What does structural sharing actually look like for a man in this position? Not in theory, in practice. It does not look like moving in with someone. It does not look like getting married. It does not look like joining a support group or downloading an app. Those are the suggestions the culture tends to offer, and they miss the point so completely that they reinforce the resistance rather than reducing it. Structural sharing, at its most basic, looks like making the life legible to one or two people who have earned proximity. Earned proximity. Not anyone qualifies. The person must have demonstrated reliability, discretion, and sustained presence. Someone he trusts in the operational sense, not the vague sense. People he would trust with a house key, with a medical decision, with the knowledge of where his money is and how his systems work. For some men, this person is a sibling who lives within reasonable distance and maintains regular contact. For others, a long-term friend who has seen the private life and has not withdrawn. For a smaller number, it is a professional, an attorney, a financial advisor, a concierge medical practice. The specific person matters less than the structural position. What matters is that someone is moved from the outer circle of social acquaintance into the inner circle of operational awareness. That move requires specific actions, not emotional confessions, not dramatic conversations, practical, unglamorous actions. It means telling that person where the important documents are, the will, the insurance policies, the financial accounts, the medical directives, the login credentials for essential accounts, stored in a way that is both secure and accessible. Each of these disclosures carries a different weight. The medical information is usually the easiest. It feels clinical, impersonal enough to share without significant discomfort. A man can say, "I take blood pressure medication," and feel that he is conveying a fact, not exposing a weakness. The financial information is harder, not because it is shameful, because it is private in a way that feels deeply personal to a man who has managed his own money for decades. Telling someone where his accounts are, how much is in them, and how they are structured feels like handing over a piece of his interior architecture. The number in the account is not just money. It is the accumulated evidence of his discipline, his choices, his priorities. It is a portrait of his life drawn in transactions. The household information, the sump pump, the water heater, the garage code, the quirks of the back door, this may be the most psychologically revealing of all. Because this is the operational layer, the daily texture, the part of the life that no one else has ever needed to know. Sharing it feels less like disclosure and more like admission. An admission that the life has machinery, that the composed surface rests on a substrate of mundane maintenance, that behind the quiet competence is a series of specific, ordinary, unglamorous tasks that someone else might need to perform. It means telling that person the names of the doctors, the medications, the dosages, the schedules, the reasons. It means giving that person a key to the house, or telling them where one is hidden. This is the step that often feels most concrete. A key is not information, it is access. Physical access to the interior of his life. Handing someone a key changes the perimeter, not much, but measurably. The boundary between inside and outside, which has been absolute for decades, now has one narrow opening that someone else controls. It means telling that person about the dog, the feeding schedule, the vet, the medication, the behavioral tendencies that a stranger would not know. It means telling that person what to do in a specific scenario. If he is hospitalized and cannot communicate for 48 hours, what are the priorities? What bills cannot wait? What systems need attention? What should be ignored? What matters and what does not? None of this requires emotional vulnerability. It requires sharing information, practical, concrete, operational information, the kind that a man who runs a complex life already possesses and organizes naturally. The only difference is that the information, which has always lived inside one person, is now shared with one other. This is not intimacy. It is infrastructure. And framing it as infrastructure rather than intimacy is what makes it accessible to a man whose identity resists the therapeutic frame. There is a concept that becomes useful here: selective legibility. Full legibility means the entire life is visible to others. That is what marriage often produces: a fully legible life in which another person can see, understand, and operate within the complete system. Selective legibility is different, choosing which parts of the life become visible, to whom, and under what conditions. Controlled disclosure, the minimum necessary transparency to ensure continuity without surrendering privacy. A man who values his privacy does not need to abandon it. He needs channels. Narrow, specific, well-defined channels through which essential information can flow to a designated person if and when that flow becomes necessary. This is analogous to what he already does in other domains. He has an insurance policy. That is structural preparation. He has a retirement account, continuity planning. He may have a will, posthumous legibility. The emergency contact question is asking for the same thing, not posthumous legibility, pre-crisis legibility. The ability for his life to be read and operated by another person during a temporary disruption. Selective legibility preserves autonomy because the man retains control over what is shared, with whom, and how. He decides the scope, defines the boundaries, selects the person, determines the trigger conditions. The life remains his. The design remains his. The modification is not a surrender of authority. It is an extension of authority into a domain he has not previously addressed. This reframing speaks to the man in his own language, the language of design, of systems, of competent preparation, not the language of emotional openness or vulnerability as strength. What works here is precision, architecture, control extended rather than control relinquished. There is a deeper shift embedded in this concept. For decades, the man has defined strength as the ability to manage alone. Selective legibility proposes a different definition. Strength as the ability to ensure continuity. These are not the same thing. Managing alone is a capability. Ensuring continuity is a design principle. A capability can be interrupted by a single event. A design principle survives the event because it was built to survive it. He does not have to stop managing alone. He can continue managing alone for as long as his health allows. Selective legibility does not change the daily operation. It changes the contingency. It says, if the daily operation is interrupted, the life does not become illegible. Someone holds enough of the map to navigate the essential corridors. That is not dependency. That is engineering. The same mind that organized 30 years of solo operation can organize one sealed envelope and one uncomfortable conversation. The scale is smaller. The discipline is the same. The financial dimension deserves specific attention. A man who has managed his finances independently for decades may have a sophisticated and well-organized system, diversified accounts, automated payments, retirement planning, insurance coverage, tax strategy. The architecture may be excellent, but financial architecture that lives entirely in one person's knowledge is operationally fragile, regardless of how well constructed it is. If the man is incapacitated for 2 weeks, who can pay the mortgage? Not in the abstract, specifically, who has the login? Who has the account number? Who has the authority? Who knows which account the payment draws from and on what date? A 2-week medical disruption for a well-managed financial life does not produce bankruptcy. It produces friction. A bill paid late triggers a credit flag. An insurance claim sits in pending status because the follow-up call has a 40-minute hold time and the man is exhausted. His car insurance renewal arrives while he is in the hospital and the window closes in 4 days. None of these are devastating individually. All require an alert, functional adult to notice and respond. When that adult is also recovering, response time stretches. And stretched response time is where friction becomes cost. The reconstruction does not require giving someone control of his money. It requires creating a pathway, a document, a letter, a sealed envelope. Something that contains enough information for a trusted person to maintain essential financial functions for a defined period. This is the financial equivalent of a spare key. The neighbor does not live in the house, does not rearrange the furniture. simply has access to the entry point if access is needed. A man who would never leave his house without insurance should be equally reluctant to leave his financial infrastructure without a continuity pathway. The logic is the same. The preparation is the same. The discipline is the same. Only the domain is different. There is also a legal dimension that most men in this position have not considered. Without a healthcare proxy, a document that designates someone to make medical decisions if the patient cannot, the hospital follows default protocols that vary by state. In some states, the hierarchy moves to parents, then siblings, then more distant relatives. In others, the hospital may need a court-appointed guardian. None of these pathways are fast. None of them involve the friend who knows the man best. None of them reflect the actual structure of his relationships. A durable power of attorney serves a similar function for financial decisions. Without one, no friend, no neighbor, no brother in Ohio can access his bank accounts, pay his mortgage, or manage his obligations during an extended incapacity. The accounts sit frozen. The bills sit unpaid. The system sits idle. These are not dramatic legal measures. They are standard documents that any attorney can prepare in an afternoon. They cost a few $100s. They take effect only under specified conditions, and they are the legal equivalent of the sealed envelope, a prearranged pathway that allows someone to act on his behalf when he cannot act for himself. Most married men have these documents without thinking about them, because estate planning and medical planning are part of the natural administrative infrastructure of marriage. For a never-married man, these documents must be created intentionally. They do not emerge from the fabric of daily life. They must be built. And building them requires the same thing the envelope requires: choosing someone, telling them, making the private life legible to one trusted person. The envelope is still on the kitchen table. He has thought about it for a few days, not constantly, in the background, the way he thinks about anything that requires a decision but is not yet urgent. He thinks of his brother in Ohio, reliable but far away. His friend Mark, who drove him home from the hospital. Good man, would help, but does not know the daily architecture. He thinks of his neighbor, Linda. She has lived next door for 9 years. They talk over the fence. She once held a package for him while he was traveling. She has a spare key. He gave her one years ago for exactly this kind of reason, though he has never thought about it in precisely these terms until now. Linda might be the answer. Not because she is the closest person in his life emotionally, because she is the most structurally positioned, proximate, reliable, discreet, already holding a key. He considers the conversation, what he would say, how he would frame it. He does not want it to sound like he is dying. He does not want it to sound like he is asking for help. He does not want it to sound like a confession or a plea or a dramatic announcement. He wants it to sound like what it is, a practical arrangement between two adults who live next to each other. The same category as borrowing a lawnmower or accepting a package, just slightly more significant, just slightly more interior. He rehearses the opening in his head, not word for word, just the tone, the approach. He wants to lead with the practical, the envelope, the information inside, the conditions under which it would be relevant. He does not want to lead with the reason. The reason is obvious once the envelope is explained. He does not need to narrate the vulnerability. The envelope narrates it. On Thursday evening, he walks next door. He knocks. She answers. He says he has something to ask. The conversation lasts about 20 minutes. Most of it is practical. He gives her the envelope, tells her it contains information about his medical situation, his finances, and his household systems. Tells her it is only relevant if something happens to him and he cannot communicate for a period of time. Tells her she should open it only under those conditions. He tells her about the dog's schedule, about the sump pump, about the pharmacy, about his brother's phone number in Ohio. She listens, asks a few clarifying questions, does not react dramatically. There is no tearful moment of connection, no breakthrough, no catharsis. She says she understands. She puts the envelope in her kitchen drawer. That is it. The conversation was not satisfying the way completing a project is satisfying. It was awkward in a low-grade way, the way it is awkward to discuss life insurance or write a will. Slightly morbid, slightly premature, entirely necessary. And yet, that conversation did something that decades of competent solo operation could not do. It created a bridge. Not a wide bridge, not a permanent bridge, a narrow, specific, carefully controlled bridge between his private operating system and the outside world. A single point of structural contact that did not exist before. He walks home. The evening is quiet. The street is ordinary. The same street he has walked 10,000 times. But something in his chest has shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. Something that was held tightly has been released, just slightly. And the release is neither comforting nor alarming. It is unfamiliar. The feeling of a man who has moved one small piece of his interior world outside of himself for the first time in decades. He does not feel vulnerable. He feels lighter, by a fraction. The weight of total self-containment, a weight he did not know he was carrying because he had never set any of it down, has been reduced by the width of one sealed envelope. That is what it means to have translated part of a private life into shared reality. Not widely shared, not publicly shared. Shared with one person, in one drawer, for one purpose. The existential question that has been building through the entire examination settles here into its final form. What does it mean to have built a solid life if that life has never been translated into shared human reality, even minimally? The answer, now, is that it means the life was incomplete in one specific dimension. Not the living of it, the continuation of it. The life was complete for inhabitation. It was not complete for interruption. The envelope corrects that, modestly, narrowly, sufficiently. The bridge does not change his daily life. He still manages everything himself. He still pays his own bills, schedules his own appointments, maintains his own home, feeds his own dog, and operates his own systems without input from anyone. The bridge is not for daily use. It is for interruption. It exists in reserve. Like a generator that sits in the garage and does nothing until the power goes out. He may never need it. He may go another 10 years without a medical event that requires activation. He may go 20. He may go the rest of his life. That is possible. And if that happens, the bridge will have cost him nothing except one slightly uncomfortable conversation and the knowledge that a sealed envelope sits in his neighbor's kitchen drawer. But if the interruption comes, the bridge will be there. And the difference between having it and not having it will not be measured in emotional terms. It will be measured in hours, in days, in the speed with which essential functions are maintained, in the absence of cascade, in the reduction of friction at the exact moment when friction is most costly. That is what continuity looks like. Not a transformation of the life, a modification, a single structural addition to an otherwise complete system. The kind that does not change performance under normal conditions, but fundamentally changes behavior under stress. There is a temptation at this point to broaden the frame, to talk about connection in larger terms, about community, about belonging, about the human need for others, about the statistics and the policy implications. That temptation should be resisted, not because those subjects are unimportant, but because they are not what this examination is about. This is about one man, one form, one blank line, and the structural reality that line revealed. The man sitting in the waiting room is not a demographic. He is not a statistic. He is not a case study. He is a specific person who has built a specific life and who has encountered a specific structural question. He answered the question, not perfectly, not completely, but with enough precision to close the most critical gap. He created a minimal continuity pathway. He shared essential information with a trusted person. He did not change who he is. He did not restructure his identity. He did not convert to a new philosophy of life. He made an engineering modification to a well-functioning system that had one significant design limitation. For now, that is enough. The medical office has not changed. The waiting room has the same chairs, the same television on the wall with the sound off, the same receptionist behind the same counter, the same clipboard with the same metal clip attached to the same intake form. He is back. Not for the shoulder. That healed months ago. This is a routine visit, annual blood work, the kind of appointment a responsible man keeps because he understands maintenance. He has always understood maintenance. Of his car, of his home, of his body, of his finances. Maintenance is not something anyone has to remind him about. It is built into the way he operates. The form is the same. Name, date of birth, insurance provider, pharmacy preference, known allergies, current medications. Then the line near the bottom. Emergency contact. He does not pause the way he did before. He writes a name. He writes a phone number. He writes neighbor in the relationship field. He hands the clipboard back. He sits down. Nothing has changed in the room, but something has changed in the architecture. He knows now what the line is asking. It is not asking who he likes. It is not asking who would feel sad. It is not asking whether he is connected to the human race in some general emotional sense. It is asking whether his life has a continuity structure, whether there is at least one person who can cross from notification into consequence, whether the system he has built can survive a temporary absence of its builder. The name he wrote is in the database now, not just ink on paper, a connection. Thin, quiet, structural. The kind no one will notice unless the phone rings. A man may have lived honorably for decades, quietly, without drama, without visible turbulence, without the kind of upheaval that forces reassessment. He may have kept his responsibilities in order. He may have protected his freedom. He may have maintained his standards. He may have built something real and substantial and private and exactly to his specifications. None of that is dismissed by anything that has been said here. None of it is diminished. None of it requires apology or revision. The life was built with real materials by a real person for real reasons. Those reasons were sound. They remain sound. The life is not a failure because it encounters a structural question at 55 or 60 or 65. Every life encounters structural questions. The only variable is when and how clearly the question presents itself. For this man, the question presented itself as a blank line on a clipboard, a minor administrative detail that most people complete without thought. For him, it opened a longer examination. An examination of what independence actually consists of when it is tested by something other than daily routine. An examination of what a life looks like from the inside versus what it looks like from the outside, from the perspective of an institution that needs someone to call. An examination of the distance between social connection and operational standing, between being known and being structurally embedded in the life of another person. That examination did not produce a dramatic result. It produced a modest one. A conversation, an envelope, a key, a name on a line that now carries slightly more structural weight than it did before. But modest results are often the ones that matter most in later life. Not the grand gestures, not the wholesale reinventions, the small, precise modifications that close a specific gap without disturbing the larger architecture. He did not reinvent himself. He did not undergo a transformation. He did not discover a new philosophy of life or embrace a new way of being. He sat at a kitchen table. He wrote down what he already knew. He put it in an envelope. He walked next door. He handed it to someone he trusts. The entire modification, from recognition to action, required about 2 hours of his time spread across a few weeks. 2 hours, against decades of unaddressed structural exposure. The ratio is absurd. The cost was minimal, the resistance was real but manageable, and the result was a life that now contains something it did not contain before. A pathway, a bridge, a second person who holds a small piece of the map. That is what later life preparation looks like for a man who values precision over drama. Not a revolution, an edit. A single line of code added to a program that was otherwise running well. After 55, some questions stop asking how well life runs on a good day. They begin asking whether life has a continuity structure when the operator is interrupted. The emergency contact line is not mainly about emergency. It is about adjacency, authority, and transferability. It asks, without decoration, who can be called, who can arrive, who can act, who belongs close enough to matter, who stands inside the perimeter of this life. These are not romantic questions. They are not sentimental questions. They are engineering questions dressed in institutional language, and they deserve to be answered with the same discipline and clarity that built the life they are asking about. A man who runs a complex, private, well-maintained life is not being asked to dismantle it. He is being asked to ensure it can persist through a temporary disruption. That is all. The rest, the daily operation, the autonomy, the privacy, the composed surface, the quiet competence, all of it stays. All of it remains his. All of it continues as before. The only addition is a bridge. One narrow bridge. One point of contact between the interior and the exterior. One person who holds enough information to keep the system from stalling when the operator steps away from the controls. That bridge is not a concession to weakness. It is the final structural element in a life that was otherwise complete. The question was never whether he was independent. That was settled long ago. Settled by decades of evidence. Settled by a life that functions, by all observable measures, exactly as intended. The question was whether independence had been built into a life that could survive interruption without becoming unreadable. He stands up when his name is called, follows the nurse down the hall. The form stays on the counter face down, already moving through the system. Somewhere in his neighbor's kitchen drawer, a sealed envelope holds the operating manual for his life. 1 page, then 2, written in his own hand, given freely, received without drama. By the time emergency contact forms begin to feel heavier, the issue is no longer paperwork. The issue is whether a private life has been built with any living bridge between autonomy and consequence. And the man who notices the weight of that line, who sits with it long enough to understand what it is really asking, who makes the precise and unglamorous modification that the question requires, has answered it. Not with sentiment, not with transformation, with structure, the same way he has answered everything else.